Sierra Leone mourns the victims of this week's devastating mudslide near Freetown. A report charts ways to expedite critical medical research during epidemics, such as West Africa's Ebola crisis. And Nokia's new Bothi phone aims to revolutionize the selfie. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Now, flags are being flown at half-mast across Sierra Leone on Thursday after the government declared 7 days of national mourning in remembrance of the victims of a mudslide that swept away homes on the edge of the capital, Freetown. Britain's Queen Elizabeth has sent her deepest sympathies to the hundreds of victims of the mudslide. Around 400 bodies have been found, but approximately 600 people are still missing, as according to the Red Cross. Soldiers and volunteers equipped with shovels and pickaxes are continuing to dig through the site of a mudslide on Thursday in search of bodies that may still be buried. Aid agencies are warning that corpses trapped in the mud are likely to contaminate water sources and cause outbreaks of disease. Continuous rain is making the search difficult and dangerous. Uganda is now home to 1 million South Sudanese refugees. The conflict in South Sudan has created the world's third largest refugee crisis after Syria and Afghanistan. The International Rescue Committee says more than 75% of South Sudanese refugees in Uganda have arrived in the past year following a major rise in violence. Reporter Jason Patinkin takes us to the border in northern Uganda.
One by one, they cross into Uganda. They are refugees from South Sudan, escaping a war that has pitted Dinka, Nuer, and Equatorian tribes against each other.
We ran here because one day, a week ago, the Dinka came and they killed 5 people. One of those killed is my brother's son.
Small way stations dot Uganda's border with South Sudan. New arrivals rest after the exhausting escape from the war.
We stayed for 3 weeks under trees. I only brought saucepans, plates, and some cups for water. I need to be taken to a place where at least I can find peace so I can forget what happened behind.
The next day, they are registered and head to a larger collection point an hour away. But here, they meet another challenge. Though Uganda says it grants refugee status unconditionally, authorities screen the new arrivals here. The goal is to make sure no Ugandan citizens register for free food intended for refugees and to prevent South Sudanese from registering twice. But the process can be aggressive. The Ugandan official asks intimate questions to each family member in front of the whole group. Those he accuses of lying are pulled aside. Iya is one of them. Desperate after escaping war only days ago, she insists she is a real refugee.
This is my first time to come for registration, but they refused to register me. They said I am a Ugandan, but I am not a Ugandan. I am a South Sudanese.
Hours go by. Eventually, the official allows her to move to the next stage. All evidence points to her being a legitimate refugee. At a Mugo camp, each family receives a small plot of land to construct a small shelter. A civil servant who fled the South Sudanese town of Ye, Kamis Koni, has received his plot, but has yet to start building. He says he has lots of time.
I may stay maybe for 5 years, because the nature of the situation in my country, there's no stability, the way I see. I don't have hope really if South Sudan will have peace at the moment.
For him and a million others, a new life as a refugee in Uganda is only beginning. Jason Patinkin for VOA News, Mvepi, Uganda.
Saudi state media is reporting that King Salman has approved opening a border crossing with Qatar in order to allow pilgrims to make the Hajj. The Saudi press agency says that in addition to opening the Salwa border crossing, Saudi Arabia would send planes to Doha to transport Qatari pilgrims at Saudi expense. The report further revealed the decision came after a meeting between Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Qatar royal family member Sheikh Abdullah bin Al Thani. Saudi Arabia previously said it would only allow Qatari pilgrims to arrive on flight from Doha, leading Qatar to accuse Saudi Arabia of politicizing the process. Now, the two countries have been locked in a diplomatic battle since June, when Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates cut ties with Qatar over allegations the country supports terrorists. Qatar denies the accusations. A United Nations inquiry found that 2 United Nations investigators were murdered by a group of Congolese, likely militia members from the Central Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the inquiry, however, said that an absence of evidence does not preclude the possibility that others are involved. Michael Sharp, an American who was coordinator of an independent sanctions monitoring group, and Zaide Catalan, a Swede, were killed in central Congo on March the 12th while carrying out investigations for a report to the UN Security Council. Now, the bodies of Sharp and Catalan were found in a shallow grave 2 weeks later. Zimbabwean state media says President Robert Mugabe arrived in South Africa Thursday for a regional summit. However, that gathering is being overshadowed by accusations that his wife assaulted a 20-year-old model in a Johannesburg hotel room with an electric cable. Mugabe's 52-year-old wife, Grace, has applied for diplomatic immunity to protect herself from possible assault charges, according to South African police. Debbie Engels, the mother of the alleged victim, Gabriella, told Reuters her daughter had received 14 stitches on her head from Sunday's assault, which the mother did not witness, and demanded Mugabe face justice.
I really hope that they don't give her the immunity. I hope a warrant of arrest is issued and that she must have a day in court. She must have a day in court. I want justice for my daughter. It was somebody else, that person would have already appeared in court already, but she's getting too much leeway. This woman has basically taken my child's income away from her, because, I mean, at the end of the day, her face is what brings in her money.
Well, there has been no official comment from Harare, and requests for comment from Mugabe's spokesman and from Information Minister Chris Mushoe have gone unanswered. Now to West Africa, to the north. In fact, the International Criminal Court has ordered an Islamic extremist to pay $3.2 million in restitution for destroying centuries-old religious shrines in Mali. Ahmad Al-Faqi Al-Mahdi was convicted by the court last year for overseeing the destruction of 9 mausoleums and a mosque door with pickaxes and bulldozers in the ancient city of Timbuktu, when extremists briefly seized control of northern Mali in 2012. In a landmark ruling, the court treated the destruction of the shrines as a war crime when it sentenced Al-Mahdi to 9 years in prison. He was facing as many as 30 years in jail, but the court took into account his admission of guilt and expression of remorse. In issuing his ruling, the presiding ICC judge explained the reasoning behind the panel's ruling.
The Chamber considers that the economic harm caused by Mr. Al-Mahdi necessitates individual reparations for those whose livelihoods exclusively depended upon the protected buildings, and collective reparations for the community of Timbuktu as a whole.
Well, the shrines date back as far as the 14th century and are listed as World Heritage Sites by the United Nations Cultural Agency. The UN agency has since restored the mausoleums known as the City of 333 Saints. Timbuktu is regarded as a center of Islamic teaching and a key to the spread of Islam across the African continent. ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda said Al-Mahdi's alleged actions amounted to a callous assault on the dignity and identity of entire populations and their region and their historical roots. Well, hundreds of people participated in a candlelight march and vigil in the U.S. city of Charlottesville, Virginia, for the woman killed when a Nazi sympathizer allegedly ran her down with his car nearly a week ago. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. They raised their voices Wednesday night in memory of Heather Heyer, one of hundreds of counter-protesters marching against a white supremacist rally when she was killed and several others wounded. Earlier Wednesday evening, friends, family and mourners gathered for a memorial service for Hare.
Say to yourself, what can I do to make a difference? And that's how you're going to make my child's death worthwhile. I'd rather have my child, but by golly, if I got to give her up, we're going to make it count.
She wanted to put down hate. And for my part, we just need to stop all this stuff and just forgive each other.
After the service, one Virginia leader criticized President Trump, saying bigots are being emboldened by the president's mixed messages on the tragedy.
It just reflected an absence of leadership. I'm not worried that his words will affect the arc that Virginia is on, because we put away the divisions and hatreds of the past. Again, we're not perfect at anything. We need to improve every day, but we have an understanding for how harmful and tragic this kind of division is, and we've set it aside. The president hasn't, but we're not going to let him dissuade us from the positive path that we're on.
The senator was making references to Trump's controversial comment that both white supremacy sympathizers and those opposing them share the blame for the violence at last Saturday's rally where Heather Hare was killed. For his part, the president acknowledged Hare on Twitter prior to the service, calling her a truly special young woman. Well, the deadly violence during the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville last Saturday has sparked worldwide reaction, especially in Europe, where such groups evoke memories of the Nazi-era atrocities. Viewers, Gladys Hoke reports.
Protesters gathered near Berlin's Brandenburg Gate on Wednesday in memory of Heather Heyer, a young woman killed when a car ran full speed into a group of anti-racist demonstrators in Charlottesville. Many Germans were puzzled to see protesters carrying banners with Nazi symbols that have been banned in their country since the end of World War II.
My grandfather fought against Nazis in the Second World War, and I think it is a disgrace that Donald Trump is not against Nazis. Every American should know that we are against neo-Nazis. Full stop.
Protesters said it was important not to ignore racist and far-right movements anywhere.
I think a real analysis is missing of what racism is about, but also a strategy and perspective on how to fight it. Therefore, I think it is important that anyone who cares about it takes this concern to the streets.
Germany was among the first to condemn the far-right rally in Charlottesville.
Those were absolutely repulsive scenes at this extreme right march. There was outrageous racism, anti-Semitism, and hate in its most despicable form to be seen.
British Prime Minister Theresa May on Wednesday expressed thinly veiled criticism of the U.S. president for blaming both the far-right groups and their opponents.
I see no equivalence between those who propound fascist views and those who oppose them. And I think it is important for all those in positions of responsibility to condemn far-right views wherever we hear them.
Human rights groups have condemned what they see as increasing racial discrimination in the United States and elsewhere.
I would say there is a toxic global discourse that has developed over the past number of years, a toxic global discourse which in a way is also been propagated very directly by political leaders in various parts of the world.
Experts say prosecutions of violent hate groups are necessary but not sufficient. They're calling for a thorough investigation of Charlottesville events in order to determine how best to reverse the dangerous trend. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends also. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, analyzing the impact of clinical trials during the Ebola epidemic. Stay with us. Well, joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Leone to tell us about conducting clinical trials during an epidemic. Hello, Leone.
Hello, Vincent. Well, a recent released report on implementing clinical trials during epidemics concludes, among other things, that community engagement in particular is an essential element to the conduct of successful clinical trials. In the report, Integrating Clinical Research into Epidemic Response, the Ebola Experience, by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, researchers assessed the value of the clinical trials held during the 2014-2015 epidemic and made recommendations about how the conduct of trials could be improved in the context of a future international emerging or re-emerging infectious disease events. With no approved therapeutics or vaccines, more than 11,000 people died in the Ebola outbreak in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Joining me in the studio for more discussion on clinical trials is Jeremy Konyndyk, Senior Policy Fellow with the Center for Global Development, and he previously led USAID's Ebola response. Jeremy, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
So could you please elaborate on how essential communities were for the success of clinical trials during the Ebola outbreak?
What we found with the entire outbreak response was that community participation and community trust were absolutely crucial to success. So we saw that in every area. It's particularly important for clinical trials because those are by nature experimental, and the outcome isn't known. It's not a miracle drug. There can be a lot of rumors and mystery about it if it's not well explained. So having good science is not enough. That needs to be understandable and accessible to the population you're working with in the trial.
And when we know how dangerous and infectious Ebola is, tell us about what it took in terms of the work that the researchers did. What did it take for safety and also to come up with a positive result?
Sure. Health worker safety was a critical risk and a critical, ultimately, success factor in containing this outbreak. So that's why this kind of research is so important. You know, health workers are the most at risk in this kind of an outbreak because they're on the front lines, they're providing the services, and they're crucial for that reason to the success of any effort to contain an outbreak. So when you have no therapeutics and no vaccines, there's a real chance that a lot of them could die, as we saw in the early days of this outbreak. Investments in things like infection prevention and control are also extremely important. The outbreak was able to spread as much as it did in those early months because the mechanisms and the systems in place for preventing infection spread in health centers were very weak in the three countries.
Now, how can, when we look at what happened with the Ebola outbreak, what were some of the lessons learned in terms of moving forward that other countries can replicate?
Sure. Preparedness makes a huge difference. It's not an accident that this disease, which in addition to Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, also popped up during this outbreak in Mali, Senegal, and Nigeria, it didn't take off in those latter three countries. And they were better prepared. They had somewhat better health systems. You know, not hugely strong health systems in every case, but they had better preparedness and stronger systems. And having that little bit of extra preparedness made a lot of difference. So things like good diagnostic systems, good a basic laboratory capacity to be able to diagnose the disease, good surveillance, so that when some strange disease is emerging in a remote part of the country, the government's public health systems can detect that early on, route it to the lab for identification, and good public information and public awareness. The other huge lesson, as I mentioned earlier, is good infection prevention and control. And that's something that you need not just for Ebola, not just for some strange or novel infectious disease. It's very important for the day-to-day work of these centers.
But countries that have limited resources, as we saw, what do they do when you look at the way that you have to spread the resources? How do these countries know that, okay, perhaps something will happen, we need to put that much into preparedness? How do you determine that?
So there is a system that the world has developed now for conducting peer evaluations of countries' preparedness. It's something called the Joint External Evaluation, is the technical term, but basically what it is. A group of people come in and they evaluate a country's level of preparedness and the strength of some of these systems and make recommendations of where those investments should be targeted. There is a question about how that should be paid for because a lot of these countries don't have huge health resources and they need to be very strategic about how they allocate them. So there's a role there for international assistance and support from the World Bank and other donors to also help with that.
Okay, and quickly now, having gone through this experience, do you think the world is better prepared for perhaps another Ebola outbreak or another disease outbreak of that extent?
I think the world is much better prepared for another Ebola outbreak because the awareness of it is much higher. And of course, the understanding of how to defeat it is much more widespread at this point. And we have a vaccine, so that's huge. I'm less confident about some other new disease that could be on the horizon. I think what we saw with Ebola is that the world systems are still too weak to contain this kind of an event.
Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you,
we
my
appreciate
pleasure.
your time.
Thank you.
And that was Jeremy Konijndijk. He is a Senior Policy Fellow with the Center for Global Development. Now, an autopsy is a medical exam of the body of a person who has died. An autopsy helps to answer questions about the person's illness or the cause of death. In our Ask the Expert segment today, we spoke with Dr. Bennett Omalu, physician, forensic pathologist, and neuropathologist, and asked him, what is an autopsy?
And the autopsy is a very sophisticated, systematic examination of a human body or parts of a human body, applying scientific methods, laboratory tests to determine the cause of death, the mechanism of death, and the manner of death. An autopsy is multifaceted and is multi-staged. It's not as simple as it may be portrayed on TV sometimes. It entails first identification of the body, identification of the circumstances surrounding the death, the scene investigation and documentation, then external examination of the body, internal examination of the body, whereby you open up the body cavities and then examine each and every organ of the body. Then you take representative samples of the organs and tissues for microscopic analysis and examination. You take samples of the body fluids like cerebrospinal fluid, eye fluid, different types of blood, heart blood, brachial blood, femoral blood, all types. You take samples of bile and samples of the urine. And then you perform toxicological analysis of the body samples, looking for the presence or absence of drugs and other harmful compounds that could cause death. And then many times we do other sophisticated laboratory testings. In this day and age now, we are beginning to do mutational analysis, looking for specific genetic diseases. For example, somebody could drop dead suddenly, and we examine the heart. There's nothing wrong with the heart, but if you do a mutational analysis of specific proteins in the heart, you could identify that the individual had what we call channelopathy, which is a genetic disorder that you may not see with your naked eye. So the autopsy is becoming more and more technologically sophisticated. It's not just opening up a body and examining it now.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Leone. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, Leone, thank you very much. Now be sure to watch Leone health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. And it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. You've heard of the selfie. What about the body? We'll be right back.
Because many people lost their lives to the heavy rain.
The International Criminal Court, l'audience de la Cour pénale.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. From beer gardens on the rooftops of department stores to quiet wood-paneled craft breweries, now the Japanese seem to enjoy their beer in the summer. But beer consumption has actually been falling for 5 years straight in Japan. It seems the younger generation are to blame. After work, drinks which were once the trademark of suited Japanese businessmen seem to be losing their appeal with millennials. Japanese youth tend to be more independent-minded than their baby boom generation parents, who saw going out for beers with office bosses and co-workers as a call of duty. Well, next up, a $1 billion tower is lifting the San Francisco skyline to new heights. Unlike in New York and Chicago, the new 326-meter high-rise is a gargantuan presence in the liberal West Coast city. Now, tech giant Salesforce.com bought the naming rights to the 61-story steel and concrete building, adding to concerns that the tech economy is steamrolling through the city. Now, the top of the Salesforce Tower has generated controversy of its own, with 9 unoccupied floors set aside as canvas for artist Jim Campbell to display low-resolution images captured throughout the day by cameras placed around the city. Now, the artist hopes the display will spark new interest in the public art trend. Well, and finally, you've heard of a selfie, but how about a body? Now, Finnish brand Nokia's new smartphone is an Android device with 4 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigabytes of memory. In an effort to make its new device uniquely social among its young target audience, the company is putting a new spin on the popular selfie trend. Nokia 8 users will be able to record and stream video that combines both front and rear cameras, a body. Now, the company claims it is the first smartphone to boast the built-in feature, although consumers could previously download apps that take pictures with both cameras. And that is what is trending. And that is also our show for today. Now, be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. A plate is a dish that you put your food on.
Have a lot on your plate.
Hey Anna, I'm having a party this weekend. You should come.
I wish I could, but my weekend is really busy. I'm baking a wedding cake, writing my article, teaching 2 classes, and oh, my parents are visiting.
Wow, you have a lot on